It was just past 3 on a humid Thursday afternoon when Marquita, Tasha, Armstrong stepped off the bus at the corner of Elm and Ridgewood, her hand cradling the gentle curve of her 7-month belly. The August sun beat down in wavering heat waves, and Tasha shielded her eyes, squinting at the familiar stretch of cracked sidewalk that led her home. She adjusted the canvas tote dangling from her elbow. Inside were fresh peaches and the ingredients for Marcus's favorite comfort meal, beef and dumplings, which she planned to surprise him with after his 5 p.m. shift at the precinct. She paused, took a slow breath, and savored a moment of calm before the city sirens and the blare of far-off car horns filled the air. As she rounded the corner onto Ridgewood, the squeal of tires split the quiet. A dark blue squad car spun in, cutting off her path. Tasha's heart fluttered as she recognized the badge number on the door, 4471. Officer Carter Jackson eased out of the driver's seat, jaw clenched, eyes fixed on her. Before Tasha could even muster a greeting, Jackson's voice cracked like a whip. "Hey, you there! Stop moving." He barked the words as though she were a hardened criminal rather than the soft-spoken librarian he'd often seen walking her dog in the early mornings. Startled, she stepped back, almost losing her balance on the uneven concrete. I'm just walking home," Tasha said, her voice measured and gentle. She raised her free hand, palm open. "Officer, I live right down that block." Jackson's gaze narrowed. He took a menacing step forward, his hand hovering near his holster. "Don't lie to me, lady. You look suspicious, loitering in a high-crime area." His eyes flicked past her belly to her bundled tote, then back up to her face. "You got papers? ID? What are you hiding?" Tasha swallowed, her pulse hammering in her temples. "I work at the Elm Street Library. Miss Bennett is my supervisor. You can call them." "Please, I'm not causing any trouble." She took another cautious step backward, but the cop closed the gap in 2 strides. Without warning, Jackson shoved her. Tasha's arms flailed as she stumbled, peaches tumbling out of her tote and rolling across the pavement. She gasped, clutching her coat over her stomach, instinct screaming to protect the life inside her. Passers-by froze. One woman raised her phone, capturing the moment in shaky, horrified footage. But Jackson wasn't finished. His face burned red with fury. He aimed a swift kick at her side, a single, brutal arc of his heavy boot. The impact landed squarely against her ribs, sending a shockwave of pain through her abdomen. Pain flared so viciously that Tasha crumpled, collapsing onto the hot sidewalk, her breath stolen by terror. "Get out of here," Jackson snarled, swiveling on his heel to return to his car as though nothing had happened. He slammed the door and peeled away, tires screeching against the curb. Tasha lay curled on the ground, tears threatening to spill as she pressed trembling fingers against her side. The world tilted, distant shouts from bystanders melded into a cacophony. Then a voice cut through the haze, "Call an ambulance, she's pregnant." A man knelt beside her, his uniform different from Jackson's. Lieutenant Marcus Armstrong, her husband, raced toward her as the siren wailed in the distance. Tasha's eyes widened in disbelief. The very man whose badge Jackson served under was on his way to rescue her. "Marcus," she whispered, each syllable a gasp of relief and dread. "How? What happened?" he asked, kneeling and tracing the peach juice smeared across her cheek. He gently lifted her hand, examining her swollen belly. "Tasha, stay with me. I've got you." The ambulance arrived moments later, its bright lights reflecting off the pavement. As paramedics eased Tasha onto the stretcher, Marcus hovered, his face etched with fury and worry. Every step toward the doors felt like walking through a storm of shattered promises, the promise of safety beneath a uniform, the promise of protection, now broken by one man's reckless violence. In the back of the ambulance, Tasha's world narrowed to the beeping monitors strapped around her and Marcus's hand, warm and unwavering, gripping hers. She closed her eyes against the pain, drawing strength from his presence. Somewhere, buried beneath fear and shock, a spark of resolve ignited, it wasn't going to end here. Not while her husband, the captain of his precinct, breathed his strength into her. As the doors slid shut, Tasha clung to one thought: Jackson had no idea whose wife he was kicking. And soon, the full weight of that truth would come crashing down on him. The ambulance doors slid open onto the gleaming tile floor of Riverside General's emergency bay. Paramedics lifted Tasha onto a stretcher and wheeled her through a flurry of doctors and nurses. Marcus followed close behind, suit jacket fluttering against his back, forehead creased with concern. He helped guide the stretcher to Trauma Room 4, then stepped aside as the team worked to stabilize her. Inside the room, Tasha's breathing was shallow but steady. A soft beeping from a fetal monitor assured Marcus that their baby was still with them, at least for now. He sank onto a chair beside her bed, phone in hand. His first call went to Chief of Police Diane Cross. "Chief, it's Marcus. Tasha's been hurt, badly. Officer Jackson did this." His voice cracked. "I need internal affairs here, now." He hung up and dialed his sister, who worked at the local TV station, knowing full well the code of ethics they lived by. He needed someone to document what happened, before the department tried to bury it. Minutes later, Lieutenant Rosalind Vega from Internal Affairs strode in, badge clipped to her belt. She gave Marcus a quick nod, then turned to the attending physician. "Doctor, how's she doing?" The doctor, grim-faced, replied, "Blunt abdominal trauma, bruised ribs, possible concussion. We'll keep her under observation tonight, but both mother and baby are stable, for now." Vega motioned Marcus aside. "I want a full statement. And any surveillance or bystander footage, every frame. The department will review this thoroughly." Marcus nodded, handing her his phone. He'd already saved the shaky cell phone video of Jackson's kick. "That's one. I've asked my sister at WCTV to hold off on airing until you've got the facts." Vega's eyes flicked with appreciation. "Good call. We'll want to control the narrative here." She tapped her notepad. "Captain Armstrong, you're in command. We'll reach out to your office." As Vega left, Marcus returned to Tasha's side. He squeezed her hand. "I'm here, Tash. I promise I'll make this right." She managed a faint smile before drifting into a drug-induced rest. Marcus sighed, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. He glanced at the fetal monitor readout, 128 beats per minute, and let himself believe she and the baby would pull through. By 7 p.m., word had seeped out. The nurses whispered in the hallway about the captain's pregnant wife being assaulted by one of our own. Text messages pinged on Marcus's phone, "You okay? I saw the clip, what a monster. Need anything?" Then, a news alert, officer accused of assault on pregnant civilian, video goes viral. He tapped the alert. The cell phone footage was now everywhere, social media feeds, local news teasers, police watch blogs. Comments ranged from horror to outrage to, disturbingly, she probably provoked him. Marcus's jaw tightened, he knew how fast public sentiment could be twisted. He returned to Tasha's room, checked her pulse, then scrolled through the video again. Jackson's body language, cocky swagger, the brutal kick, was unmistakable. The caption under one repost said, "He didn't know whose wife he was kicking." Marcus's chest tightened at the irony. Jackson served under him, reported directly to his precinct. Now his own uniform was disgraced by this act of ugly violence. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the precinct before dawn. Jackson's cruiser still sat in the lot, door ajar, dashboard lights blinking. Inside, the squad room buzzed with uneasy chatter. "Captain," Sergeant Ramirez greeted him, stepping forward. "We've got internal affairs setting up an interview room behind the bullpen. They're seizing Jackson's badge and weapon." Marcus nodded, voice calm but steel-edged. "Good. Notify his union rep and have Jackson come down immediately." He turned to the other officers. I want every camera in the area pulled today. Roster logs. Dispatch records. No stone unturned. In one corner, a group of younger cops clustered around a screen, watching another upload of the clip. One of them mouthed, "Unbelievable," then swapped it out for gossip about a bakery robbery. Marcus strode over and held up his badge. Enough. The room fell silent. This is our code: protect and serve, to every person. That video makes us look like predators, not protectors. We will own this. Transparency from the start. He paused, letting the words sink in. I want a press conference at noon. I'll speak. No sugarcoating. We take this seriously. Officer Jackson is suspended without pay until we conclude our investigation. Murmurs rippled through the room. Jackson, or someone sympathetic to him, might have had friends here, but Marcus didn't flinch. He'd built his career on integrity. He wouldn't let one bad officer drag the entire department into disrepute. At noon, dozens of reporters gathered outside the precinct front doors, cameras and microphones pointed at the steps. Marcus stepped up to the podium, flanked by Chief Cross and Lieutenant Vega. He cleared his throat. Good afternoon. Yesterday, a uniformed officer struck and kicked a pregnant woman who was simply walking home. That officer, Detective Carter Jackson, has been placed on immediate suspension without pay. We have launched an internal and external review, and we will cooperate fully with the district attorney's office. He paused to let the gravity of his words register. I want to address the community directly. There is no justification for brutality, especially against a civilian. I assure you, this department will seek accountability, both legally and administratively. Our hearts are with the victim and her family, and we will do everything in our power to ensure this never happens again. He stepped back as cameras flashed. In the crowd, he spotted his sister's news crew, ready to go live. He nodded at them, then turned and walked inside, leaving behind a precinct prepared to face the fallout, and a promise of real, tangible justice. By sunrise, the video of Officer Carter Jackson's kick had become the defining image of the weekend. Across Magnolia Avenue, a small crowd had gathered outside the precinct steps, candles flickering and handmade signs reading, "Justice for Tasha," and "No badge above a pregnant body." Marcus Armstrong arrived early, dressed in a dark suit but without his tie, determination etched into every line of his face. Next to him stood Reverend Louise Daniels, the pastor of the community church where Tasha taught story hour on Saturdays. "Captain," Daniels said softly, "they're ready for you." Marcus took a breath and stepped to a flimsy podium set up on the sidewalk. Reporters angled cameras as he scanned the crowd, dozens of neighbors, junior officers in uniform, and a few activists from the civil rights coalition he'd contacted last night. "Thank you all for being here," he began, voice steady. "My wife, Tasha Armstrong, remains under observation in Riverside General Hospital. Both she and our unborn child are stable, but the physical and emotional trauma they endured cannot be dismissed." He paused to let the words land. He pressed his lips together and continued. "I want to assure the community that we will pursue every legal avenue. I have requested that the district attorney file criminal charges against Officer Jackson. In parallel, we are working with civil rights attorney Simone Patel to bring a federal civil rights lawsuit." At Patel's name, she stepped forward, adjusting her crisp blazer. Marcus nodded to her and returned his attention to the crowd. "This is not about revenge. It's about accountability and preventing another mother from facing what Tasha faced." Across the scrum of microphones, a reporter shouted a question, "Captain Armstrong, what do you say to critics who claim you're using your position to influence the case?" Marcus held her gaze. "My position demands integrity. If anything, this case will show the public that no badge, no matter how many stripes, is above the law." He stepped away from the podium, allowing Patel to address legal questions before the crowd slowly dispersed into the morning traffic. Inside the hospital room, Tasha drifted in and out of sleep, her hand resting reflexively on swollen ribs. Every time she awoke, she saw Marcus's shadow at the foot of her bed, phone in hand, typing notes or making calls. This morning, she squeezed his hand weakly. Marcus leaned down. "How are you feeling?" "Like someone kicked me with a horseshoe," she managed a wan smile. Then her eyes filled with tears. "I keep seeing his boot." He brushed a loose strand of hair from her forehead. "I know, love. I'm so sorry." She closed her eyes. "I'm glad you were there." When Dr. Kensington entered with a fresh chart, Marcus politely stepped aside. The doctor examined Tasha's vitals and reviewed ultrasound images. "Your baby's heartbeat is strong. There's some swelling around the ribs, but no internal bleeding. We expect you home in 3 to 5 days, provided you rest." Tasha exhaled in relief. "Thank you, doctor." After the doctor left, Tasha turned to Marcus. "What happens next?" He sat beside her, taking both her hands in his. "We let Simone lead the civil suit, the DA will decide on criminal charges. And I promised you, and myself, that we'll push for departmental reform. No more hidden complaints, no more swept-under-the-rug reports." His voice cracked slightly. "But first, you rest." Meanwhile, at Jackson's modest apartment across town, the mood was tense. Jackson sat at his kitchen table, uniform still crisp in his closet, as his union representative, Officer Leah Torres, placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. "Carter, you need to calm down," Torres said, voice measured. "The IA has your statement, the chief's on your back, but if you stick to the story," she resisted, "I felt threatened, you have a chance of a lighter discipline." Jackson's jaw tightened. She wasn't resisting. She was trembling. Torres held up a hand. "Look, buddy, they're already rolling the DA in on this. We need medical records, proof you were hurt too, anything to muddy the waters." She slid a file across the table, Jackson's own minor complaint history, previous use of force incident reports. "We'll fight this. But you have to cooperate." Jackson stared at the folder, guilt and anger warring behind his eyes. He closed his fists. "I didn't think how it would look." Across the city, Simone Patel and Reverend Daniels convened a strategy meeting in Patel's office, stacks of bystander videos spread across a conference table. "Every angle strengthens our case," Patel remarked. "Notice how the first clip shows Jackson's shout before the shove. That shows intent. Then the kick, unequivocal, excessive force against a pregnant civilian. We'll present this to the press Friday." Daniels nodded. "And I'm organizing a prayer vigil at Elm Street Library next Wednesday. We'll invite elected officials, too." Patel tapped her pen. "Good. Meanwhile, I filed our preliminary complaint with the U.S. Attorney's Civil Rights Division. Federal oversight puts extra pressure on the local DA's office to act swiftly." By evening, the story had shifted from a shocking viral video to a full-blown campaign for justice. Social media pages sprouted under hashtags like #ArmstrongsDeserveJustice and #ProtectPregnantMothers. Marcus and Tasha watched as neighbors left get-well-soon balloons and cards at the hospital entrance. Even Tasha's co-workers at the Elm Street Library posted photos of an empty storytime chair, a small white sign taped to it, "Tasha will return soon. We miss you." As the skyline glowed dusk pink, Marcus and Tasha shared a quiet moment on her hospital bed. He read aloud comments from well-wishers, she laughed weakly at the kindness. Then she turned serious. "Promise me you won't let them forget this," she whispered. "Promise me our child will grow up knowing we fought back." Marcus leaned in to kiss her forehead. "I promise. This is only the beginning." And somewhere in the hush of that room, hope, vulnerable but unbroken, breathed between them. The next morning, sunlight slanted through the blinds of Tasha's hospital room like a spotlight on the work ahead. Marcus sat at her bedside, tablet in hand, reviewing the day's agenda. Today was the arraignment of Officer Carter Jackson, a pivotal moment that could set the tone for every hearing to follow. "Tasha, how are you feeling?" he asked gently, brushing a stray curl behind her ear. She flexed her fingers, wincing slightly. "Better than yesterday. Ready to get this started?" Marcus nodded. "I spoke with District Attorney Helen Ramirez. She's filing 2 charges, aggravated assault on a pregnant civilian and a civil rights violation. She'll announce it at 10 a.m. in her press room." Tasha swallowed. "So Jackson's actually going to jail today?" "Booked, yes," Marcus replied. "But he'll likely post bail. That's why we need strong community pressure, and a powerful statement from you." He tapped the tablet. "Simone Patel wants you to draft a victim impact statement tonight." Tasha took a deep breath. "Okay. Let's do it." By mid-morning, the precinct lobby had transformed into a media circus. Reporters lined the walls, cameras rolling as DA Ramirez took to the podium in a glass-walled conference room downtown. "This office will not tolerate brutality," Ramirez declared into the microphones. "Today, we file charges against Detective Carter Jackson for the unprovoked assault of a pregnant woman, Ms. Tasha Armstrong. Our investigation confirms the video footage clearly shows intent and excessive force. We will pursue justice swiftly." Questions flew. Will Jackson be denied bail? What about departmental accountability? Ramirez answered with unwavering resolve, "We are consulting with internal affairs and civil rights experts to ensure comprehensive oversight. I have requested that Mr. Jackson's bond include strict no-contact provisions." Outside, Marcus and Simone Patel watched on a laptop feed. She turned to him. "He's setting the right tone. Now we have to keep it." At the county jail, Jackson sat in a holding cell, uniform replaced by an orange jumpsuit, cuffs clinking as he paced. His defense attorney, John Winters, arrived with a sheaf of case files. "Carter, listen," Winters began, voice low. "We'll argue for minimal bail, say $25,000, and motion to remove the no-contact order. Claim misidentification, emotional distress, anything to complicate it." Jackson ran a hand over his forehead. "I messed up. I know I did. But thinking of cash bail now? I need the union and my family to cover it." Winters grimaced. "They might. But right now, focus on what you say. The DA's office has stronger evidence than they expected." Meanwhile, at the county courthouse steps, Reverend Louise Daniels and a crowd of about 50 supporters gathered under banners reading, "Armstrongs deserve justice," and "Protect pregnant mothers." Volunteers handed out water bottles and flyers urging everyone to attend the arraignment at 2 p.m. Among the crowd, Pastor Daniels raised her bullhorn. "We stand with Tasha. We will not be silenced by threats or intimidation. Justice for our sisters and mothers." The crowd cheered, echoing across the stone facade. Cameras from local news outlets captured the solidarity. Inside the courtroom, the arraignment began. Tasha, supported by Marcus, Simone, and Reverend Daniels, entered slowly. Jackson was escorted in by sheriff's deputies, head bowed. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Helena Price, called the case. Charges were read. Jackson's counsel requested a bail hearing. Prosecutor Thomas Liu argued for $100,000 bond with GPS monitoring and a no-contact order, citing public safety risk and violation of civil rights. Winters countered, "Detective Jackson is a 10-year veteran with no prior felony record. He poses no flight risk." Judge Price leaned forward. "Given the severity of the offense, assaulting a pregnant woman, I set bond at $75,000, payable within 48 hours. He must not contact Ms. Armstrong or her family. Additionally, his handgun and badge will remain in department custody pending further order." A hush fell. Jackson's eyes met Tasha's for a fleeting moment, regret and fear warring behind them. He was led away to arrange bail. Outside, Tasha exhaled. Reverend Daniels pressed a prayer shawl into her arms. "Cover yourself, dear," she said softly. Marcus hugged his wife fiercely, relief and resolve mingling in his eyes. That evening, the Armstrong residence, usually the scene of calm Sunday dinners, hummed with activity. Journalists, legal assistants, and community organizers crowded the living room, laptops open, notes scattered. Simone reviewed an initial draft of Tasha's victim impact statement aloud. "On that day I was not a threat. I was a wife carrying my first child, walking home with peaches for my husband's dinner. Detective Jackson's blow did not just bruise my body, it threatened my future, my family's hope. I ask this court not only to punish wrongdoing, but to signal that no woman is less worthy of safety and respect." Tasha's voice trembled as she edited. "Add that my baby's name is Grace, a name for strength in adversity." She paused, looked up. "Write that, too." Simone nodded. "We will deliver this during the sentencing hearing. For now, rest." Marcus squeezed Tasha's hand. "Tomorrow, we launch the Celeste Act draft, a civilian oversight bill requiring timely release of body cam footage and independent review boards." Tasha managed a small smile. "Let's be Grace's legacy." As midnight approached, the team dispersed. Marcus helped his wife settle onto the couch, blanket around her shoulders. She closed her eyes, exhausted but resolute. Before drifting off, Tasha whispered, "Thank you for fighting." He kissed her temple. "We're fighting together." And in the quiet of that house, a movement found its blueprint, one arraignment behind them, and a long road of reform ahead. By mid-morning on a Tuesday, Carter Jackson's name had been splashed across every local headline. Despite posting the $75,000 bond and promising to comply with the no-contact order, he remained under intense scrutiny. Outside the county detention center, protesters gathered again, this time with hundreds of shoes laid out to symbolize the countless women who'd suffered similar violence without justice. Reverend Daniels led the crowd in a moment of silence for all those names written on paper placards: Sarah, Latoya, Maria, Aisha. Meanwhile, inside his modest living room, Jackson stared blankly at his phone. Calls from family and union reps went unanswered. Guilt and fear warred in him, he realized the magnitude of what he'd done. When his lawyer, John Winters, arrived with bail paperwork, Jackson's shoulders slumped. "They'll try to re-argue excessive force," Winters said, carefully setting the documents on the coffee table. "Next hearing's in 2 weeks. Until then, you're under a microscope. Stay low." Jackson nodded numbly, the gravity of the phrase, excessive force, ringing in his ears. Across town, Tasha Armstrong's hospital discharge was scheduled for Friday morning. As nurses wheeled her out in a wheelchair, her tote bag, now filled with get-well cards instead of peaches, rested at her feet. Marcus stood at the curb in his crisp uniform, cheeks hollow from restless nights. "How do you feel?" he asked, helping her into the passenger seat of their SUV. "Tired," Tasha admitted, closing her eyes as the city sped by. "But ready to keep fighting." He reached over and squeezed her hand. "We've got a community dinner tonight, friends, neighbors, they're all pitching in to raise funds for Grace's college. And Simone said we'll unveil the draft of the Armstrong Act." Tasha managed a weak laugh. "Good. Let's turn this pain into policy." That evening, the Armstrongs welcomed a small crowd into their backyard. Lanterns strung between trees cast a warm glow on tables laden with casseroles and sweet tea. At the head table sat Simone Patel, Reverend Daniels, and Councilwoman Elaine Ortiz, who just agreed to sponsor the new civilian oversight bill. Marcus tapped his glass to get attention. "Thank you, everyone, for coming. Your support is what's kept us going." He turned to Tasha. "Finish the rest, Tash." Tasha rose slowly, her silhouette illuminated by the lanterns. She cleared her throat. "When Carter Jackson kicked me, he didn't just assault a stranger, he assaulted the mother of our community's future. Grace deserves better than silence. We're introducing the Armstrong Act to require every police use of force incident to be reviewed by an independent civilian board within 30 days, with all bodycam video released publicly within 72 hours. She took a shaky breath. No more buried complaints. No more answers after someone like me is already broken. The crowd broke into applause. Ortiz stepped forward. I'll be filing this with the city council next week. With your voices behind us, we can make it law. 2 days later, at City Hall, the council's public hearing room overflowed. TV crews lined the gallery, and council members studied binders of community testimony, letters from mothers, veterans, teachers, all demanding change. When it was Marcus's turn, he approached the podium with Tasha standing beside him, Grace's knitted blanket draped over her shoulder. Council members, he began, my wife and I came here expecting to find safety in the badge. Instead, we found a looming threat. The Armstrong Act isn't just a policy, it's accountability made concrete. It tells every officer that they serve the people, not the other way around. He nodded to Tasha, who stepped up to read a statement the two had drafted together. By the time they finished, even the most skeptical council member seemed moved. Ortiz thanked them and pledged to fast-track the bill through committee. Back at the precinct, Lieutenant Vega oversaw the leak of Jackson's personnel file, detailing 2 prior complaints of unnecessary force that had been quietly dismissed. When the files went public, the department scrambled for a response. Chief Cross held a press conference acknowledging the oversight failures and promising a department-wide culture reset with new training protocols. Jackson watched the news bulletins from his apartment, realizing there was no hiding now. Every past incident he'd hoped forgotten was coming to light, reports of excessive force at routine traffic stops, a civilian's black eye, a teenager's bruised arm. The public outcry grew louder. That weekend, Tasha and Marcus hosted a volunteer training at their home, residents learning how to document police interactions, request public records, and testify before oversight boards. Grace's baby clothes were laid out on a table beside pamphlets and legal guides. When a new mother asked Tasha how she found the strength, Tasha replied, I had to. For her. And now, I hope to help you never need that fight. As the training wrapped up, Tasha felt something shift within her. The fear of Jackson's violence still lingered, but it was tempered by purpose. She saw young activists ready to hold law enforcement accountable, neighbors determined to rebuild trust. The movement she and Marcus had started was no longer just theirs, it belonged to every mother, every family, every citizen who believed in justice. That night, as she tucked Grace into her crib and watched her sleep, Tasha whispered, we did this together. Then she turned off the light, ready for whatever came next, knowing that they had already begun to change the world, one courageous step at a time. The crisp morning air carried an almost electric tension as Marcus and Tasha Armstrong arrived at the new Hanover County Courthouse for Detective Carter Jackson's felony trial verdict. It had been 6 long months since that sweltering August day on the sidewalk, and in that time they had weathered bail hearings, discovery motions, and a media firestorm. Today, the jury's decision would mark a turning point, not just for their family, but for every mother and child who dared to trust in a badge. Inside the hushed courtroom, Judge Helena Price presided from her bench. Jackson sat at the defense table, gaunt and hollow-eyed, flanked by his attorney. Marcus gripped Tasha's hand as the bailiff announced, all rise for the jury. The 12 jurors filed in, faces shuddered, then took seats. The bailiff intoned, has the jury reached a verdict? The foreperson stood. We have, Your Honor. She handed the slip of paper to the clerk, who passed it up to Judge Price. Silence fell like a shroud. With measured calm, Judge Price read the words no one inside that courtroom would ever forget. We, the jury, find the defendant, Detective Carter Jackson, guilty on all counts. A collective exhale seemed to ripple through the spectators, reporters leaned forward, officers exchanged quick glances, and Marcus felt Tasha exhale against his palm. For a long moment the room held still, as though the very walls were absorbing the gravity of that verdict. Judge Price continued, "Given the intentional use of excessive force against a pregnant civilian, this court sentences Detective Jackson to 4 years incarceration, suspension of all law enforcement certification, and revocation of any pension benefits." She paused, eyes sweeping the courtroom. "May justice, and accountability, serve as a guide for those who wear a badge." Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as the Armstrongs stepped down onto the stone steps. Tasha, pale but resolute, rested one hand over her abdomen and raised the other in a small gesture of triumph. Marcus's voice was steady as he addressed the press. "Today, we witnessed a system work, as slowly and painfully as it sometimes does," he said, "but it worked. This verdict sends a clear message: no one is above the law. We dedicate this moment to every mother whose voice was silenced, and to every child whose life matters." Tasha followed, her voice soft but firm. "I hope this ruling brings healing, not just for me and our family, but for communities who have lost trust. May it be the start of real change, so no one else must endure what I did." 2 weeks later, the Armstrong household buzzed with a different kind of anticipation. Between political rallies and media interviews, there was a more personal milestone approaching: the arrival of their daughter, Grace. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, as golden light filtered through the nursery curtains, Tasha went into labor. In the delivery room at Riverside General, Marcus held his wife's hand through every contraction, whispering words of encouragement. When little Grace finally entered the world, crying, fierce, and perfect, Marcus choked back tears. Tasha smiled through exhaustion as the nurse placed their daughter on her chest. "She's beautiful," Marcus said, voice thick. "Welcome, Grace." Tasha stroked her newborn's cheek. "You're here, baby girl. We fought for you. And now we get to fight for everyone who comes after." With Grace safely nestled at home, the Armstrongs pivoted toward their next mission: institutionalizing the reforms they'd fought so hard to pass. They partnered with Councilwoman Elaine Ortiz to draft legislation for statewide civilian oversight boards, and Simone Patel began organizing pro bono legal clinics under the banner of the newly formed Armstrong Foundation for Police Accountability. That fall, hundreds gathered at Wilmington's Riverfront Park for the Foundation's inaugural conference. Community leaders, victims of police violence, and law enforcement allies shared the stage. Marcus opened with a moment of silence for the countless untold stories of abuse, then introduced Tasha, who held Grace in her arms. "Today, we stand not just as survivors, but as architects of a better system," Tasha declared. "The Armstrong Foundation will provide legal advocacy, mental health support, and policy research to ensure accountability isn't an exception, it's the rule." State legislators took notice. By spring, the Grace's Law bill, mandating release of body cam footage within 24 hours and requiring independent investigation of all use of force incidents, passed both houses with bipartisan support. At the signing ceremony, Governor Landon Matthews praised the Armstrongs' courage. "You turned unimaginable pain into a beacon for reform," he said. "Your daughter's name, Grace, symbolizes the grace our system must show its citizens. Today, we make that grace law." Back home, life settled into a new rhythm. On Saturday mornings, Tasha returned to Elm Street Library to lead story hour for toddlers, Grace perched on her lap. Marcus, promoted to captain for his transparent leadership, hosted monthly town hall meetings at the precinct, inviting civilians to speak openly with officers over coffee. One evening, as the sun set across the docks, Marcus and Tasha sat on their porch swing, Grace curled in her mother's arms, the gentle lull of the harbor behind them. "We did it," Tasha whispered, kissing Grace's forehead. Marcus wrapped his arm around both of them. "We did. But the work continues." Tasha nodded, gazing at the skyline of the city they'd helped reshape. "Then let's keep building, one step, one story, one Grace at a time." And in that quiet moment, hope wasn't just a promise, it was a living legacy, carried forward by every family emboldened to stand up, speak out, and demand justice. 18 months after that hot August afternoon, Carter Jackson sat in his cell at Riverbend Correctional Facility, uniform exchanged for an orange jumpsuit. The clang of steel bars was his new reality. Each morning, he marched single file with other inmates to count and breakfast in a concrete hall. He replayed the footage of Tasha Armstrong over and over, her hand pressed to her belly, her tears as she lay on the sidewalk. Sometimes he woke in a cold sweat, haunted by the woman he once saw as just another suspect. Across town, life for the Armstrong family had settled into a purposeful rhythm. Marcus, now Deputy Chief of Community Affairs, opened each day with "Coffee with the Captain," inviting neighborhood leaders and rank-and-file officers into a bright, glass-walled meeting room at the precinct. His phone buzzed constantly with updates, new civilian oversight boards meeting in Charlotte, Greensboro, and beyond, invitations to speak at law enforcement academies, inquiries from activists in other states hoping to replicate the Armstrong Foundation's model. Tasha greeted mornings in her home office, once a spare bedroom, now the headquarters of the Armstrong Foundation. On her desk sat framed news clippings. Grace's law becomes model for 20 states, former Officer Jackson reflects in memoir, "I owe everything to Tasha's strength." A stack of thank you notes from mothers who had successfully filed complaints through the Foundation's legal clinic sat next to a well-worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. She still led Story Hour at Elm Street Library on Saturdays, her voice calm and warm as she read to a circle of toddlers, Grace toddling at her side with her favorite stuffed rabbit. One crisp autumn afternoon, Marcus and Tasha stood in front of the state capitol, where Grace's law had been officially codified into the general statutes. Governor Landon Matthews returned to the podium to deliver the signing remarks. "Today, we cement a promise, that every citizen, pregnant woman, child, veteran, immigrant, deserves transparency and protection from those entrusted to serve us," he said. "Thank you, Captain and Mrs. Armstrong, for your unflinching courage." Tasha watched Grace clutch the governor's pen. The little girl's eyes were bright with curiosity. Marcus slipped an arm around Tasha. "We did it," he whispered. Behind the scenes, Simone Patel convened a virtual meeting of legal partners in Washington, D.C. Representatives from the Civil Rights Division, the ACLU, and state attorneys general dialed in to discuss a national coalition to monitor compliance with the new laws. Tasha logged on from her home office, careful to mute her microphone when Grace wandered in asking for juice. The following spring, the Armstrong Foundation hosted its first National Police Accountability Summit in Wilmington. Delegates from 25 states filled the grand ballroom of the Riverfront Hotel. Panels ranged from building community oversight boards to navigating the grand jury process. Marcus delivered the keynote. "Justice is not a moment, it's a movement. We started with a single act of brutality, but we turned that act into a blueprint for hope. Today, you carry that blueprint into your own communities." Back in his cell, Carter Jackson received a copy of his own memoir, Lessons in Humility, published by a correctional education program. In it, he wrote candidly, "I thought the badge meant I was untouchable. I was wrong. The woman I harmed made me face my worst self, and inspired a movement that reshaped our state. For that, I owe her everything." He dog-eared the page where he recounted his first therapy session in prison, where he confronted the rage and prejudice that drove him. His counselor had told him that true justice requires not only punishment, but also repentance and education. Jackson now tutored fellow inmates in reading and civics, hoping to atone, one day, perhaps, as a caseworker teaching de-escalation courses. At home, one evening in early summer, Tasha and Marcus sat on their porch swing, listening to cicadas. Grace played quietly on the lawn under a string of solar lights. They reflected on how far they'd come. "You know," Tasha said, leaning her head on Marcus's shoulder, "I never expected our daughter's birth to kickstart a national conversation." He smiled and kissed the top of her head. "She's Grace Armstrong, named for strength and mercy. It makes sense she'd be at the center of something big." They sat in companionable silence, the gentle lapping of waves from the nearby harbor as a reminder of life's ebb and flow. Then Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a slightly crumpled photograph. Tasha, smiling on the sidewalk after her discharge, still bruised but glowing with newfound purpose. "Remember this?" he asked. She nodded, eyes misting. That was the day everything changed. He folded the photo and tucked it into his shirt pocket, close to his heart. "We turn tragedy into transformation. That's the legacy I want for Grace, and for every child who deserves to grow up in a world that values their life." As dusk settled, they watched their daughter chase fireflies across the yard. In that moment, justice felt less like an abstract ideal and more like a living current, carried in each act of courage, each policy enacted, and each family restored. And though one man's violence had sparked the fight, it was the unwavering resolve of two ordinary parents, Tasha and Marcus Armstrong, that ultimately changed the story for generations to come. Nearly 5 years have passed since that searing August afternoon when Detective Carter Jackson delivered a blow that would reverberate far beyond the cracked sidewalk at Elm and Ridgewood. Today, Tasha and Marcus Armstrong stand in the Grand Hall of the International Police Reform Conference in Geneva, invited keynote speakers at a gathering of activists, lawmakers, and law enforcement leaders from over 40 countries. Their daughter, Grace, now nearly 6, twirls at her mother's side in a crisp navy dress, her bright eyes reflecting the chandeliers overhead. As Tasha steps to the lectern, she surveys the sea of flags lining the room and smiles. What began as a local fight for accountability has become a global movement, she tells the assembly. She recounts how Grace's law has been enacted in more than a dozen U.S. states and inspired similar transparency measures in Canada, the UK, and New Zealand. When she describes how civilian oversight boards now review over 80% of use of force incidents in those jurisdictions, the audience responds with warm applause. Meanwhile, Marcus addresses a parallel breakout session on building sustainable accountability networks. He outlines the Armstrong Foundation's new Fellowship for Emerging Advocates, which has trained over 200 grassroots leaders to document incidents, navigate legal systems, and engage elected officials. The fellowship alumni, hailing from Sao Paulo to Sydney, share case studies of resurrecting buried complaints and securing reforms in their home cities. Marcus closes with a reminder: justice isn't static. We must keep innovating to meet new challenges. Back in Wilmington, Carter Jackson's journey has taken an unexpected turn. After serving 3.5 years, he was granted parole last December on the condition that he join a restorative justice program. Now working as a peer mentor in prison reform workshops, Jackson co-facilitates dialogues between law enforcement trainees and survivors of police violence. In a recent interview published in the Wilmington Observer, he wrote, "I was blind to my own power and prejudice. Facing Tasha in court, and then seeing her lead a nation, made me confront the worst in myself. I hope my work now helps build empathy where there was none." Closer to home, the Armstrong Foundation's headquarters hum with activity. Tasha is finalizing her manuscript for a book titled Paths to Accountability, a guide for citizens and officers, due out next spring. It blends personal narrative with practical toolkits for community organizations. Marcus, having retired from the Wilmington Police Department as Deputy Chief of Community Affairs, now lectures at the University of North Carolina School of Public Policy. His course, Ethics, Enforcement, and Equity, examines contemporary policing through case studies, beginning, of course, with the Armstrong story. On a crisp Saturday morning, Tasha returns to Elm Street Library for her monthly Justice Story Hour. Grace sits cross-legged on the reading carpet, clutching her well-worn rabbit, while toddlers gather to hear Tasha read from a children's book about fairness and standing up for what's right. Afterwards, she leads a brief art activity. Each child draws what safety looks like to them. Some paint police officers with big smiles, others depict families walking free at dusk. Outside the library, a small bronze plaque has been installed near the bench where Tasha first crumpled on the pavement. It reads, "In memory of that day, let every footstep forward be guided by justice." Passers-by pause, reading quietly before resuming their walks. Tasha often stands by the plaque, laying fresh flowers or a token of gratitude. She finds those moments humbling reminders that progress is both collective and personal. That evening, the Armstrongs gather on their porch swing, the harbor lights glittering in the distance. Grace, now fast asleep upstairs, leaves a trail of soft whimpers as she settles in her crib. Marcus hands Tasha a cup of chamomile tea. She breathes in the lavender steam. "Do you ever think about how it all started?" he asks. She nods, eyes on the little bronze marker across the street. A single act of violence could have been forgotten, she reflects, but instead it became the spark for systemic change. She reaches out and takes his hand. "We built something that outlasts us. And Grace will carry it forward." As dusk deepens, one more name is added to the library's bulletin board, another community member inspired by the Armstrongs, ready to step up. In that quiet neighborhood, justice is no longer an elusive ideal but a living, breathing current, powered by every voice that refuses to stay silent. And so the story continues, carried onward by those who choose action over apathy, one courageous step at a time. 10 years have passed since Detective Carter Jackson's boot connected with Tasha Armstrong's side on that August afternoon. This spring, the Armstrong family returns to Wilmington for a commemorative ceremony at the newly dedicated Center for Community Justice, housed in the former Elm Street Library. As dusk settles, community leaders, activists, police officers, and families gather under strings of lights in the courtyard, where a bronze relief mural depicts Tasha's silhouette cradling her pregnant belly. Marcus stands at the podium, now Commissioner of Community Engagement for the state's Department of Public Safety. His voice carries the confidence of hard-won experience. A decade ago, our city witnessed an act of brutality that could have remained a footnote in history. Instead, we turned it into a call for accountability that echoes around the world. He gestures to Tasha, seated beside him with Grace, now 10 years old, on her lap. This center will train future leaders in restorative justice, civilian oversight, and empathetic policing. Tasha rises, Grace in tow. "When I collapsed here in 2015, I feared I'd lost my voice forever. Today, I stand before you in a place built on that voice." The Armstrong Foundation dedicates this space to every person who refused to look the other way. She hands Grace a small ceremonial key. The girl steps forward and unlocks the bronze gates to applause. Marcus wraps his arm protectively around Tasha and Grace as the crowd streams inside. Inside the center's main hall, a new exhibit chronicles the journey from Sidewalk to Summit. Interactive stations allow visitors to view the original cell phone footage, explore Jasmine Delgado's award-winning documentary, and read excerpts from Paths to Accountability and its sequel, Bridging the Divide. A section honors restorative justice dialogues, featuring a recorded conversation between Jackson and Tasha, mediated by Reverend Daniels, in which Jackson apologized for his actions and pledged his support for reform. In the corner, Carter Jackson stands alongside women he mentored through prison programs. His hair is graying, but his posture is straighter than ever. When Tasha approaches, he bows his head in respect. She reaches out, and they share a brief, silent embrace. Cameras flash, capturing a moment that symbolizes real transformation. Later that afternoon, the Armstrongs travel to the state capitol to attend the White House launch of the Global Justice Fellowship, an international program inspired by the Armstrong model. President Alana Reynolds, whose administration has championed civilian oversight, greets them on the South Lawn. "Captain Armstrong, Mrs. Armstrong, your courage reshaped our nation's approach to policing," she says, embracing them both. "Today, we launch this fellowship to send advocates to 5 continents, carrying the message that justice requires both accountability and compassion." Grace, clad in her school uniform, curtsies politely. The president ruffles her hair. "And that's our future, young people committed to fairness." That evening, the Armstrong household fills with friends and family for a low-key celebration. Tasha's mother brings peach cobbler, recalling the peaches that tumbled across the pavement so many years ago. Marcus uncorks a bottle of champagne labeled, "To never forget, to always act." Grace helps pour sparkling apple cider for the kids. Simone Patel raises her glass. To the Armstrongs, 10 years of building bridges where walls once stood. Community members close the circle, toasting unity, resilience, and ongoing vigilance. The next morning, Tasha walks to her desk at the Center for Community Justice, sunlight warming the oak floors. She flips open her laptop to review chapter edits for her third book, Legacy of Courage. Outside, Grace and her friends prepare signs for their school's Police Partnership Day, a program pairing fifth graders with local officers to play games, ask questions, and build trust. Marcus joins them for a quick hug. "Ready to present your project?" Grace beams. "I'm showing Officer Ramirez how to make friendship bracelets." He ruffles her hair. "That's my girl." At the center's final session for the week, a panel titled, "From Local Incident to Global Initiative," Jackson, now a guest lecturer for correctional education programs, shares the stage with Marcus and an international delegate from South Africa. "We all start in our own backyards," Jackson tells the young advocates. "Mine began with a failure so visible that it couldn't be ignored. But failure can be the seed of change, if you nurture it with honesty and action." A student from Brazil raises her hand. "How did you forgive yourself?" Jackson pauses, meeting Tasha's gaze in the front row. "I asked for forgiveness, yes, but more importantly, I committed to it every day. I had to show, through my work, that I'd learned the lesson." As evening falls, the Armstrongs stroll home along the harbor. The gentle lapping of water reminds Marcus of how far they've come. Flourishing gardens bloom where the vacant lot once sat, the neighborhood feels alive, watched over by police who greet residents by name. They pause by the plaque at Elm and Ridgewood. Grace reads it aloud. "In honor of the courage that changed our city, may every step forward be guided by justice." Tasha slips her hand into Marcus's. "Do you think it'll last?" He kisses her forehead. "As long as people keep stepping forward." Grace skips ahead, light and free. The Armstrongs watch her go, knowing their work will continue long after they're gone, because justice isn't a destination, but a shared journey that unfolds with each new generation. And with every courageous step, the world becomes a little fairer than before. 20 years after that fateful kick, the Armstrong legacy pulses through every corner of Wilmington, and far beyond. It's a crisp spring morning when Grace Armstrong steps onto the stage of the city's new Justice and Community Auditorium, a gleaming glass and steel building erected beside the Center for Community Justice. Now 26 years old, she carries a worn leather satchel and the same steady confidence her mother once showed on that sidewalk. She's here to deliver the keynote address at the Voices of Accountability Symposium, a gathering of descendants, activists, scholars, and officers from around the globe. As she approaches the lectern, the hall falls silent. Portraits line the foyer, Tasha cradling her newborn in the hospital room, Marcus shaking hands with Governor Matthews, Reverend Daniels and Simone Patel at the first town hall, even a black and white image of Carter Jackson in his prison jumpsuit, head bowed. Now, Grace surveys the audience, families who found solace in the foundation, officers who retooled training programs, and children whose schools host Justice Story Hours. Clearing her throat, she begins. 20 years ago, my parents endured violence that could have broken them, and broken me before I was born. Instead, they became the authors of a new chapter in our city's history, one where accountability is not an afterthought, but the very framework of public trust. She pauses to let her words settle. I grew up with bedtime stories about how my mother, at 8 months pregnant, was knocked to the pavement. I learned early that courage often arrives on the heels of injustice. Yet I never felt ashamed of that story, I felt empowered by it, because it meant my family, and my community, chose to fight back. Behind the scenes, Marcus watches his daughter speak. Now in his mid-50s and retired from public office, he mentors young community liaisons at the foundation. Tasha, balancing roles as president of the board of trustees and a sought-after speaker, stands at the back of the hall, tears glistening as Grace recounts her earliest memories, the lullaby of hospital monitors, the scent of peaches in the kitchen, the steady hum of cameras at every rally. Grace continues. I've walked past 1,000 plaques honoring mothers, officers, and ordinary citizens who refuse to look away. I've studied justice in university textbooks, but I've seen it come alive in a courtroom when a jury spoke truth instead of fear. I've witnessed policy become law, not because of political expedience, but because real people, led by two brave souls, demanded it. She concludes by unveiling the Foundation's newest initiative, Project NextGen, a fellowship that sends young advocates to underrepresented communities nationwide, providing seed grants, legal toolkits, and mentorship. My hope, she says, is that every young person who felt unheard will find in Project NextGen both a microphone for their voice and a roadmap for change. After the applause subsides, Carter Jackson steps forward from a reserved seat in the front row. His presence still surprises some, but over the years he's become a fixture at anniversaries, teaching compassion seminars in reformatories. He hands Grace a single peach, an echo of that day's spilled fruit, and bows his head. I carry this with me, Jackson says quietly, voice thick. Not as a symbol of my cruelty, but as a reminder that every act of accountability can blossom into countless acts of mercy. He exchanges an unspoken moment with Tasha before returning to his seat. Later that evening, the Armstrong family gathers in the courtyard beneath the Justice and Community Auditorium's soaring arches. Lanterns illuminate elegant tables, a celebration of 2 decades of progress. Among the guests are Reverend Louise Daniels, now emeritus pastor, honored with the first Armstrong Humanitarian Award. Simone Patel, now a federal judge, lauded for her landmark rulings protecting body cam transparency. Officer Amina Hassan, one of the first graduates of the Foundation's peer mentorship program, now leading de-escalation training statewide. Alejandro and Priya, Project NextGen alumni who secured police reform referenda in Miami and Seattle. Grace raises a glass of sparkling elderflower soda. To every person, past, present, and future, who stood up when it was easier to stay silent. May we never forget that a single act of violence can catalyze a movement of healing. Tasha squeezes Marcus's hand. He nods, eyes on their daughter, proud yet contemplative. In the years ahead, the Armstrong Foundation expands into a global network, advising cities in Europe, Asia, and Latin America on crafting community-driven oversight mechanisms. Grace's Project NextGen becomes a blueprint adopted by the United Nations, with fellows championing justice from Mumbai slums to Brazilian favelas to refugee camps in Jordan. Back in Wilmington, the annual Walk for Justice begins and ends at Elm and Ridgewood, where a new, life-size bronze statue of Tasha stands, hand on heart, other hand extended in welcome. Schoolchildren circle the statue each year, laying flowers at its base, learning that civics and compassion walk hand in hand. One late autumn morning, Marcus and Tasha sit together on their porch swing, now surrounded by grandchildren's toys, watching Grace load her car for a speaking tour in Africa. The oak at the corner of Elm and Ridgewood stands taller than ever, its roots nourished by years of vigilance. Can you believe she's taking peaches with her on this trip? Tasha chuckles, recalling Jackson's gesture. Marcus smiles, eyes misty. Some traditions endure. But more than peaches, she carries our story, and the promise that justice is never finished. They sit in companionable silence, the sun climbing over the harbor, as Wilmington hums with funded programs, empowered citizens, and a living testament to courage. In the end, it wasn't the badge that defined them, nor the kick that nearly ended everything. It was the choice to turn pain into purpose, and purpose into an unbreakable current of change that carries on, one fearless step at a time.